The door shouldn't have opened. Vincent Calabrese didn't do charity. He didn't do mercy. And he sure as hell didn't do Christmas anymore. But when the knock came at 11:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve, soft, hesitant, desperate, something in him paused. On the other side stood a woman with a child in her arms. Snow melting in her dark hair. Eyes that had already seen too much. She wasn't supposed to be here. No one was. Because 3 days earlier, Vincent had done something no one expected. He shut down Christmas. Every toy drive in Chicago's South Side canceled. Every church donation blocked. Every community center that relied on his family's seasonal goodwill cut off without explanation. The neighborhood called him a monster. The priest called him the devil. His own men whispered that he'd finally lost it. But Vincent didn't care what they called him. Not anymore. Because 15 years ago, on a night just like this one, Christmas had taken everything from him. And now, standing face to face with this stranger and her son, he was about to discover that the past doesn't stay buried. Comes back. It knocks. And sometimes, it asks for help. Before we begin, my mom thinks it's impossible to get to 1K subscribers before next year. Let's prove her wrong and buy this. I would need your support, so hit the subscribe button now, and let's head straight into this enticing story. You won't believe what's going to happen next. Vincent Calabrese had built his empire on fear, respect, and silence. At 43, he controlled the South Side like a king controlled a kingdom. Construction contracts, union deals, shipping routes, everything flowed through him. Politicians smiled at his fundraisers. Cops looked the other way. Families paid their respects and kept their distance. He lived in a restored Victorian mansion on Oakwood Avenue, surrounded by iron gates and men who'd die before they let anyone through. Inside, the house was immaculate, cold, empty. No decorations, no tree, no lights. Vincent had made that rule years ago, and no one dared question it. But this year was different. This year, he'd gone further. On December 22nd, Vincent called a meeting with every community organization that had ever taken money from the Calabrese family. Shelters, schools, churches, youth centers. One by one, they arrived at his office above the old meatpacking plant on Halsted Street, expecting envelopes stuffed with cash like every year before. Instead, they got 7 words. Christmas is canceled. Don't ask me why. Father Miguel from St. Augustine's tried to argue. Vincent, these families depend on. I said don't ask. The priest left with empty hands and a sick feeling in his stomach. By morning, the whole neighborhood knew. Vincent Calabrese, the man who'd quietly funded Christmas for a decade, had pulled the plug. No gifts, no meals, no hope. People were angry, confused, hurt, but Vincent felt nothing. He sat alone in his office that night, staring at a photograph he kept locked in his desk drawer. A woman with kind eyes. A little girl with ribbons in her hair. Both long dead. He closed the drawer and poured himself another drink. Outside, snow began to fall. And somewhere across the city, a single mother named Elena Russo made a decision that would change everything. Elena Russo had exactly $43 to her name. It was Christmas Eve, and her son, Marco, was asleep in the back seat of her 15-year-old Honda, parked 2 blocks from the shelter that had just turned them away. Full capacity. No exceptions. She'd already tried 3 others. Marco was 6 years old. He had his father's dark curls and his mother's stubborn hope. He still believed in miracles, even though Elena had stopped believing in much of anything 2 years ago when her husband died and the medical bills swallowed their savings whole. She worked 2 jobs, morning shift at a diner on Ashland, night stocking at a grocery store in Bridgeport. It still wasn't enough. Rent came first, then food, then whatever was left went to keeping the lights on. Christmas was a luxury she couldn't afford. But Marco had been so good, so patient, so heartbreakingly understanding. It's okay, Mama, he'd said earlier that week. Santa knows we don't have a chimney. Elena had cried in the bathroom for 20 minutes. Now, sitting in her car with the heater barely working and her phone at 8% battery, she stared at a name she'd written on a scrap of paper. Vincent Calabrese. She'd heard the stories. Everyone had. The mob boss who controlled the neighborhood. Dangerous. Untouchable. A man you didn't approach unless you had a death wish. But she'd also heard the other stories. The ones about the anonymous donations. The bills that mysteriously got paid. The jobs that appeared when people needed them most. People said he had a code. That if you came to him with respect, showed him you weren't looking for a handout but a hand up, he might listen. People also said he'd canceled Christmas this year. That he'd turned cold. That something had broken inside him. Elena didn't care. She had nothing left to lose. She started the car, checked on Marco one more time, and drove toward Oakwood Avenue. The gates were closed when she arrived. 2 men stood guard, shoulders broad beneath heavy coats. She pulled up slowly, rolled down her window. "I need to see Vincent Calabrese." The first guard laughed. "Lady, go home. Please. Just 5 minutes." Not happening. She could have left. Should have left. Instead, she parked across the street, bundled Marco in her arms, and walked up to the gate. "My son is 6 years old," she said, voice steady despite the cold. "We have nowhere to go tonight. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for help." The second guard reached for his radio. But before he could speak, a light came on in the second-floor window, and the front door opened. Vincent stood in the doorway, backlit by the dim glow of his foyer. He was still dressed from earlier. Black shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a glass of whiskey in one hand. His face was unreadable, carved from stone and shadow. Elena met his gaze and didn't look away. "You've got 60 seconds, he said. She adjusted Marco in her arms. The boy was awake now, watching everything with wide, tired eyes. "My name is Elena Russo. I work 2 jobs. I pay my bills. I don't ask for help." Her voice was calm, clear. "But tonight I'm asking. Not for me. For him." Vincent's eyes flicked to the child. Something tightened in his jaw. "Shelters are full," Elena continued. "Hotels want credit cards I don't have. My car barely runs. It's Christmas Eve, and my son deserves better than sleeping in a parking lot." Silence. One of the guards shifted uncomfortably. Vincent took a slow sip of his drink. "You know who I am?" "Yes." "And you came anyway?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because people say you used to care." The words landed like a punch. Vincent's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Brief, almost imperceptible. He looked at Marco again. The boy stared back, clutching a worn stuffed bear. Vincent set his glass down on the entry table. "One night," he said, "you sleep in the guest room. Breakfast at 7. Then you leave." Elena's breath caught. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just follow the rules. Don't touch anything. Don't ask questions. Don't tell anyone you were here." She nodded. Vincent stepped aside, and Elena carried Marco through the door. The house was exactly as she'd imagined. Elegant, cold, empty. Hardwood floors, high ceilings, expensive furniture that no one ever sat on. No tree, no stockings, no sign that Christmas existed at all. A housekeeper appeared, an older woman with kind eyes and a worried expression. "Maria, set them up in the blue room," Vincent said without looking at them. "Make sure the kid eats." Maria nodded and gestured for Elena to follow. As they climbed the stairs, Elena glanced back. Vincent stood alone in the foyer, staring at the spot where they'd been. And for just a moment, he looked less like a monster and more like a man haunted by ghosts he couldn't escape from. Marco fell asleep within minutes of his head hitting the pillow. Elena sat beside him in the guest room, a space more beautiful than anywhere she'd lived in years, and tried to process what had just happened. She'd walked into the lion's den, and somehow the lion had let them stay. Downstairs, she could hear movement, low voices, the clink of glass. She should sleep, should be grateful and quiet and invisible. But something pulled her back down the stairs. She found Vincent in his study, a dark, wood-paneled room lined with books and shadows. He stood by the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. "He's asleep," Elena said softly from the doorway. Vincent didn't turn. "Good." She hesitated. "Why did you let us in? I told you not to ask questions." "I know, but I need to understand." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, finally, he moved to his desk and opened the bottom drawer. He pulled out a photograph and set it on the desk between them.
Elena stepped closer.
The photo showed a woman, mid-30s, dark hair, warm smile. Beside her stood a little girl, maybe 4 years old, wearing a red coat and holding a candy cane. "My wife, Angela," Vincent said, voice flat. "My daughter, Sophia." Elena's chest tightened. "What happened?" "Christmas Eve. 15 years ago." He stared at the photo like it might come to life. "I was supposed to be home. There was a meeting that ran late. Business I thought couldn't wait." He paused. "Someone sent a message that night. Rival family. They wanted to hurt me, so they went after what mattered most." Elena's breath stilled. "House fire," Vincent continued. "Electrical, they said."
Accident.
His laugh was bitter. "It wasn't an accident. Angela tried to get Sophia out. Neither of them made it." The silence that followed was suffocating. "I wasn't there," Vincent said quietly. "I was making money, building power, and they died alone." Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Every Christmas since, I see them. I hear Sophia asking when I'm coming home." He looked up, and his eyes were hollow. "So I stopped celebrating, stopped pretending. And this year I made sure no one else could either. That's why you canceled everything. If I don't get Christmas, why should anyone else?" Elena shook her head slowly. "Because punishing everyone won't bring them back." Vincent's jaw clenched. "You don't know anything about it." "You're right. I don't." She stepped closer. "But I know what it's like to lose someone you love. And I know that my son still smiles because I haven't let grief turn me into something I'm not." Vincent stared at her, and for the first time the mask cracked. "You should go back upstairs," he said, voice rough. Elena nodded and turned to leave. But at the door she stopped. "Your daughter wouldn't want this," she said softly. "She'd want you to remember her with love, not anger." And then she was gone. Vincent stood alone in the study, the photograph still on his desk. And for the first time in 15 years, he let himself cry. Elena woke to the smell of coffee and something sweet baking. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then Marco stirred beside her, and reality settled back in. They were still in Vincent Calabrese's house. Still alive. Still safe. She dressed quickly and found Marco already awake, sitting on the floor with his stuffed bear. "Mama, is this a castle?" he whispered.
Elena smiled.
"Something like that." Downstairs, Maria had prepared a breakfast that belonged in a magazine: eggs, bacon, fresh bread, fruit. Marco's eyes went wide. "Is this all for us?" "Eat," Maria said gently. "You're too skinny." Vincent was nowhere to be seen. Elena asked Maria where he was. "He left early," Maria said, her tone carefully neutral. "He does that sometimes." Elena nodded, though something felt unfinished. They ate in silence, and when they were done, Maria handed Elena an envelope. "He said to give you this." Inside was $500 in cash and a note written in sharp, slanted handwriting. Asterisk for the car. For the kid. Don't come back. Asterisk. Elena stared at the money, heart sinking. She'd hoped, foolishly maybe, that something had changed, that their conversation had mattered. But Vincent Calabrese was still a closed door. She thanked Maria, gathered Marco, and walked out into the cold morning. The gates opened without a word from the guards. As they drove away, Elena glanced in the rearview mirror, and in the second-floor window, just for a moment, she saw him, watching. Vincent spent the morning doing what he always did, making calls, handling problems, keeping his empire running. But his mind kept drifting. To Elena, to Marco, to the way the kid had looked at him with no fear, only curiosity, to his own daughter's face in that photograph. By noon, he couldn't take it anymore. He called Father Miguel. "I need to know about someone," Vincent said.
Elena Russo.
"Lives somewhere in Bridgeport." The priest was quiet for a moment. "Why?" "Just find out." 2 hours later, Miguel called back. "She's been through hell, Vincent. Lost her husband to cancer 2 years ago. Works herself to the bone trying to keep her son fed and safe. Good woman. Doesn't deserve what life's handed her." Vincent closed his eyes. "There's something else," Miguel added carefully. "Her husband. His name was David Russo." Vincent's blood went cold. "He used to work for you, back in 2010. Construction crew on the Halstead project." The memory hit like a freight train.
David Russo.
A good worker. Honest. He'd quit after a few years. Said he wanted out of anything connected to the life. Vincent had let him go with respect. No questions asked. And now his widow had ended up at Vincent's door. It wasn't fate. It was a reckoning. Vincent found Elena at the diner on Ashland Avenue. She was mid-shift, balancing plates and forcing smiles for customers who barely noticed her. When she saw him walk in, her face went pale. He sat at the counter and waited. When her break came, she sat beside him, hands shaking slightly. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "I know who your husband was." Elena's eyes widened.
David Russo.
"He worked for me." She looked away. "He never talked about it. He was a good man. He got out clean." Vincent's voice was rough. "I didn't know he died. Didn't know you existed. Why does it matter? Because you came to my door, and I almost sent you away." He turned to face her fully. "Because I've spent 15 years punishing the world for something I couldn't control. And you reminded me what I lost." Elena's throat tightened. "I can't bring them back," Vincent said. "But I can stop making everyone else suffer for it." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Christmas is back on." He pulled out his phone and made a call.
Miguel.
"It's Vincent. I'm reinstating everything. Shelters, drives, all of it. Double the funding." Elena stared at him, speechless. When he hung up, Vincent looked at her with something close to peace. "Your husband got out because he wanted a better life for you. For your son." He stood. "I'm going to make sure he didn't die for nothing." He placed an envelope on the counter, thicker than the first. "First month's rent. Security deposit. And a job if you want it. My guys always need good people in the office." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Why?" "Because maybe your kid believing in miracles is the only thing keeping me from becoming something I can't come back from." And with that, Vincent Calabrese walked out into the snow. Christmas returned to the south side. The shelters reopened. The donations flowed. The lights came back on. People whispered about what had changed Vincent Calabrese's mind, but no one knew the truth, except for one woman and her son. Elena took the job, moved into a small apartment near the park. Marco started school and made friends and still believed in impossible things. And every Christmas Eve, Vincent Calabrese placed 2 candles in his window, one for Angela, one for Sophia. He never remarried, never softened completely, but he stopped punishing the world. Because one knock on his door had reminded him that grief didn't have to be a weapon, could be a bridge. And sometimes the people we save end up saving us. If this story made you feel something, anger, sadness, hope, drop a comment below and tell me which moment hit hardest. And if you're ready for more stories that'll keep you up at night, hit that subscribe button. Because the next one's even darker. See you there.